What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Scientific Outdoorsmen Podcast. For those of you who didn't check out our last episode, which was actually our first episode, this is a brand new podcast. So do us a favor and make sure you subscribe or hit that follow button, depending on what platform you're on. And just a quick intro to what exactly this podcast is doing. We are dedicated to understanding the ins and outs of wildlife science and then taking that information and applying it to how we can be better hunters and fishermen using the conclusions that scientists are drawing from their research. So we are the three hosts here. I'm Mark, and we got these other two gentlemen. If you want to introduce yourselves.
Go for it, Cody.
I'm Cody. I'm out of Florida.
Matt
And
took
I'm
it
Matt.
from you. Oh, and I took it from you. Yeah, we're all over the country. Well, I guess me and Cody are in the same area down in Florida, and Matt is in Colorado. And we have two things in common. We are nerds, and we love to hunt and fish. So every episode of this podcast, we're going to choose a single peer-reviewed journal article or a scientific article, and we're going to look into what the scientists did in that study. We're going to explain it in the best detail that we can. We're going to talk about what those researchers found and then how that information can be used in the woods or on the water. If you're interested in the video podcast, you can watch it on YouTube or on Spotify. In most cases, we're going to show a little bit of data or some figures. In this particular case, I don't think any of these papers had any figures to show, so this one's going to be a good one to listen to while you're driving. And if you're interested in reading these papers on your own, there is a link down in the description where it'll take you to a folder where we put all the papers that we have already talked about. And finally, at the end, we're going to wrap it up by pitching the topics that we think would be interesting for the next podcast. And you guys get to vote and tell us what you want us to talk about. So make sure you wait till the end, drop a comment, and let us know which topic you think is the best. That was a lot of talking. We have a couple of announcements, just a little bit more talking before we get into this. The last podcast was on Election Day, and it's obviously already over now, but there's two really exciting things that we mentioned last time. The first being that Amendment 2, the right to hunt and fish, passed in Florida, and that means that hunting and fishing is now a constitutional right in Florida, and that creates a much more rigid barrier for the extremist, anti-conservationist environmentalists. I know that's a mouthful, but basically the people that are trying to take away this way of life that we love, it's going to be just that much harder for them to do it now. And somewhat related, in Colorado, Matt, you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah. So Proposition 127 was on the ballot, which was proposing to ban mountain lion hunting as well as bobcat and lynx hunting. Lynx are endangered and just can't hunt them anyways. And this failed in Colorado, meaning that the bobcat and mountain lion populations are both going to be accessible for hunters, and that means that the management policies that have been in place and have been working are going to be maintained. So also a big win for hunters here in Colorado.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that example right there is exactly what we're trying to avoid in Florida, because that's an emotion-based management proposal. And, you guys won that battle, but I'm sure there's going to be more. So I think people need to really pay attention, and hopefully they can prevent stuff like that from happening in the future too. Anyway, I'm going to give you one more chance to pitch your calendar, but this time you got to get those details in there because I don't think people were really digging the idea of a sweaty man calendar. So,
well, there are pictures more than just the sweaty men. But yeah, so this is the National Wild Turkey Federation's annual gun raffle calendar. So it's a calendar for next year, 2025. And every week they're going to be raffling off a different gun. And it's only $50 for the calendar. So that's over 50 chances or 50 raffles, one per week, for $50. So that's less than $1 per raffle. That's hard to beat. And there's some pretty incredible guns in here. So like we've got a Browning A-Bolt 3. So it's a 308 bolt action rifle. We got Winchester SXP shotguns, 12-gauge shotguns. That's what I use for turkey season. Love it. We got a Tikka T3X Light 6.5 Creedmoor, Browning A-Bolt 270, and then some other really cool ones. There's a handful of over-under shotguns. So a TriStar Upland Hunters, 12-gauge, 20-gauge. Really cool stuff. And then the last one, there's a Pointer Field Tech Turkey Bottomland Camo 12-gauge semi-auto shotgun that comes with a red dot sight. Ooh. So some really good stuff in there. Like I said, $50. It's capped this while it's for the Southwest region. You can send them out. So and it's capped at 1,000 entries. So every week you got 1 in 1,000 chance of winning an incredible gun for only $50.
It's pretty awesome.
If you are interested,
got mine.
Yeah, I got mine too. If you are interested. We've got an email account. It's the Scientific Outdoorsmen at gmail.com. I think that's going to be down below in the details too. Yep. Send us an email and I'll get a calendar your way. All right.
We got 2 more tiny little announcements. If you are in Florida, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers has 2 events coming up, and I'm on the board. I would love to see some of you guys there. The first one coming up, unfortunately, I won't be there because I'm going to be in Wisconsin hunting deer next week. It's going to be November 21st at 6 p.m. There's going to be a pint night in Sanford at the Wild Wild West End Honky Tonk Saloon. That's a mouthful. So the pint nights, basically it's a really simple concept. For every beer that's sold, they make a donation towards the organization. And it's just a great place to meet like-minded folks and talk about hunting and fishing and everything in between. So if you're trying to expand your friend group, your hunting buddy group, is a great place to do it. And then on December 14th, we have our annual small game hunt at Dinner Island Ranch, WMA. We're going to be meeting up at 6:30 at the check station. So you can bring out your friends, your family, and just have a good time. We basically meet up in the morning, go out and hunt for the morning hunt, and then we meet up and show each other tricks on like how to skin and clean different types of game that was harvested. Then we have a potluck wild game feast with some beers, which I think are BYOB. And if you don't have any friends to go with, just show up and we'll pair you up with another group. So, yeah, that's all we got on announcements. We're only, I don't know how many minutes in, but
8 minutes in. Yeah,
that's not too bad.
Not bad. Okay.
All right. Well, I can take the lead on diving into this paper. So thanks for all those who responded to the poll for this week's topic. We did go with the fawn orphaning, or what happens if you shoot a doe during hunting season if it's got a fawn with it. What happens to that fawn? And so the paper that we looked at, it is an older paper from 1980, led by Dennis Woodson out of Virginia Tech. And a little disclaimer at the start, this being an older paper, there are some details that were not included in the document that would really help with understanding a little bit more about the environment that they were looking at. But what they did was they went out to a 2,000-acre enclosure at Radford Army Ammunition Plant in Virginia, and they tagged a bunch of fawns. They put tags on their ears so they'd be able to identify them. And then they had these deer in the enclosure, and then they removed the does from these fawns to simulate does that would be harvested during the season. So they removed them during the hunting season. Some real quick information that I found really interesting about this army base, or the ammunition plant.
Hey, man,
yeah.
Before we dive straight into this, do you think maybe we should talk about why this is a topic that people are concerned about? Some of the background information, perhaps?
All right. Yeah, that's a good point.
For those of us or the people out there that are listening that are like, why does this even matter?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, there's a really interesting fact that I was going to get to, so I was getting carried away with that. But you're right, that's a good way to go. So yeah. I'll get to those points in a minute. But I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something that I've had happen to me a number of times, where I'm out in the woods and have a mama doe and a fawn coming through, and I'm torn between, do I want to get the meat in the freezer, or do I want to let these animals go on their way? And I've always been under the mindset of like, I need to let that doe go because I want that fawn to have a good life. And, it's also, kind of like that Bambi effect where I don't want to see that fawn kind of, searching for mom or crying out for mom while I'm sitting in the stand or, harvesting the deer there. So that's been my standpoint on it. So I've always let them walk. I don't need the meat that bad, and always have hopes that I'll be able to find another deer. So I don't know where you guys stand on that, but that's my perspective of it.
Yeah. I mentioned this like in the last episode. I had a situation where I shot a doe that I didn't even really realize had a fawn with her. And it was kind of a gut wrenching moment. But, the idea behind this, I guess, is that, these animals, especially as fawns, like there's a lot of learned behavior, and they get those behaviors from hanging out with their mother. And so finding food and shelter and avoiding predators comes with that. And especially in the earlier stages of their life, that's, the idea is that they have a much better chance of survival if they're with their mom. And I thought it was interesting. This paper actually mentioned in the introduction that I didn't even know this, but mule deer fawns will actually die if they're orphaned before they're 6 weeks old, which I don't know how they came up with that number. It's like 6 weeks in one day. Like what happened? But I think that just means that their chances of survival are just super high at that point. So, it kind of makes you wonder, does that the same thing apply to whitetails?
Yeah. And building off of that real quick. So, there's a number of ways that you can look at survival, right? There's just, in a perfect world where you don't have any predators, they're surviving by finding the resources that you need, your food, your water. But then obviously in natural environments, you're going to have a bunch of predators. So being able to identify those predators and avoid them. So it's complex world, and it's going to vary based on where you're at, which is one of the takeaways that I kind of got from this paper and some of the other ones. But there's a lot that goes into being a fawn and being able to make it through to becoming a yearling.
Yeah. And I've always kind of wondered, like, and I always thought this to be the case, that if you do shoot a mama doe, does that fawn then just like get adopted by another mom? And I always kind of assumed that would be the case. Because have you ever like used a fawn call on a doe?
I haven't, no.
Dude, it's so effective, or it can be at least. Like if you see a doe just hanging out, munching out, and you make a fawn bleat call, like a distress call, that doe a lot of times will just like beeline and come see what's going on because they just assume there's like a baby in trouble. So because I've seen that, I always kind of expected that would be the case.
Right.
And this paper does get into that, so it's kind of cool to see what the data says.
Yeah, I'm definitely new to hunting, so I was kind of in the same boat as how your intro brought up. I don't think I could shoot a doe with a fawn at this point in time, but reading this paper changed my mind maybe a little bit.
I mean, it also depends how empty that freezer is.
And how critically maybe we get into the
well, and another thing to consider too is, and this is brought up in the paper as well, is that, a lot of people don't want to harvest does. People are really focused on bucks, but in a lot of places in this country where deer are overpopulated, where we have a ton of like monocultures of corn and stuff like that, it's just like perfect habitat for these deer. Harvesting does is a really important management tool for keeping those populations in check. And so, the DNR or the, whatever game commissions are in place in each state are often encouraging people to take as many does as possible. And, I'm going to Wisconsin next week, and they want you to like go crazy on does because there's so many deer in that area. So I've got 3 doe tags. I get 1 buck tag, but I can just shoot as many does as I want. You can just keep buying doe tags. Like they have like bonus tags are $20 a pop, and you just kill as many does as you want. Just keep buying more tags.
And Kind of reminds me though, again, just how variable and how much things change across the country where I grew up hunting. So while I'm in Colorado now, grew up in the Northeast and upstate New York, and it was almost impossible to get a doe tag. One guy out of, your group of 20 friends might get a doe tag. And so it's something where it's really system dependent, but it just goes to show, the game managers know what they're doing. These policies are in place for a reason.
But yes, so the point I was kind of trying to make with that is if you're in an area where they really are depending on the hunters to reduce that population, which by the way, I think it's really important to mention like how awesome that is. I mean, that's literally the North American model of conservation, is using hunters as a tool to control these populations. So if the Game Commission is asking you to harvest does, like you should do it, because that's literally what creates that feedback loop of like why we are an important tool, and it gives us meaning. It gives us a use for that system, and that's how we kind of maintain the rights and privileges that we have as hunters. And with that said, if I was in a place like that and I saw a mama with a doe, like, yeah, would I feel bad doing it? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a monster. Like there's always going to be emotions attached to that, but I would probably convince myself to do it knowing that that's exactly what this area needs. It needs that population to be decreased. And that honestly, that kind of leads me into like a tangent, like just a thought that I have is like, a lot of people think like, oh, you need more does to have more deer. More deer means, higher chance of there being a big buck. But there's actually a lot of information out there that shows that having good ratios of buck to doe is also really important in producing higher quality deer. So, these scientists, these managers, they've been studying this. They know what they're doing. The best thing is to do exactly what they're asking you to do as a hunter to help them manage it more efficiently. All right, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, but I appreciate you pulling me away from these, what they were doing in the study so we could have that background. But like I said, there was a really interesting fact that I found that I wanted to share with folks. So this study was done at an ammunition plant. It was done in mid-'70s. And the year after this study was completed, there was an explosion equivalent to 8,600 pounds of TNT within this plant. So that's just a huge explosion. About 10 years later, there was another one, about 5,000 pounds of nitroglycerin that exploded and created a half-acre crater. So just some really interesting facts that I found about this place.
These are intentional explosions?
No, these were accidental explosions.
Oh, no.
And, it's, joking about it, but there were some casualties to that, unfortunately. Yeah. But just
with
to get an idea of like,
or the humans.
Probably, well, I know at first there were confirmed cases for the humans. I imagine there was probably something that happened for the deer too.
Those poor orphans.
So this is before the study was completed. So any mortality that was observed in the study was not associated with those explosions.
Good to know.
Just to get,
That's crazy.
Wow.
So just to give you an idea of like this environment, though, this is what we're looking at. This is an enclosed area. So there's no people that are getting in there. There's no hunting, but also it's going to be difficult for any wildlife to get in there. Before those explosions, most of the property was kind of like this rolling pasture with some cedar trees and pockets of hardwoods. And then there was also this big pocket, about 200-acre pine stand.
And a big crater.
Yeah, and a big crater. So like I said before, in this study, they went around and they marked a bunch of fawns. So they had 65 fawns that they tagged with these ear tags. This is back in the 70s. It's before the satellite stuff that we have accessible to us today. And then they kind of just drove around on this network of roads to track where the deer were. There was a pretty high density of deer in the area, about 1 deer for every 5 acres. And they tagged the deer from May to June, and then they started weekly observations in July. And at that point in July, there's actually some surprising mortality up until that point. There were only 52 deer left. So, 13 deer that died just in that brief period.
Was there an explosion between between June and July?
I don't think so, but
took out 13 deer.
maybe later in the later years, but
yeah.
So that's what the kind of the baseline is. They got all these fawns and they marked them, and they're just kind of tracking them to see where they're going. Now, to orphan the deer, what they did was they take does and they just removed them from that enclosure. So because it is an enclosure, they're not able to get back in. So there's certainty that those fawns that have been orphaned are going to stay orphaned, or at least their mother's not going to come back into the system. And they did that between mid-September and mid-November because, like I said earlier, that's to replicate does harvested by hunters.
Yeah.
And I saw we had a question from one of our viewers from the last video that was wondering if these are going to be fawns with spots or not. And they don't mention that in the study, but I would guess that when they were first marking these fawns, they were going to have spots because, like I said, they were marking them as early as, I think it was May, so May and June. So likely going to have spots at that point. And I learned, because I was looking into this, that the fawns drop their spots or lose their spots when they grow their winter coat. And so that's going to happen probably like around, I guess maybe, well, for Virginia, hard to say, but probably like around November. So by the time this study was done, these fawns probably aren't going to have their spots.
I wonder how that works for Florida when you don't have winter.
That's a good point. Yeah.
When the dry season starts.
But yeah, I would also imagine that they probably wouldn't really be able to identify them as fawns unless they had spots, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because, then it's like, well, is this a tiny doe or is it just a baby? So I'm sure they all had spots to begin with. I think that question, though, was like specifically asking if you orphaned a fawn with spots or without spots, if that made some sort of a difference in their survival rates. And yeah, again, they don't really get into those details here. But that said, they do the orphaning in, during hunting season, which I'm pretty sure, and you correct me on this, you've done a lot more northern hunting than I have. During hunting season, I don't think any of the fawns really have spots on them anymore, right?
So I've never seen it, but I have heard of someone who shot a fawn during bow season. Someone that was, new to hunting, and you could, when you got close to the deer, you could see there were still some signs of the spots on it. Okay.
Yeah, but so I think for the most part, we're talking about fawns that have already kicked their spots.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah. So and so I guess another thing, unfortunately, that the study doesn't really talk about is how long they kind of tracked these deer for to compare like movements and behaviors. They did talk about looking at them as fawns and then also as yearlings, but kind of what period that fawn stage ended at wasn't really said.
Yeah, like when does it become a yearling? They
exactly.
Really addressed that.
Yeah.
They did mention that they were still tracking them in March, so.
Yeah, and I think that was when they were considering the yearlings,
Yeah.
But still, it was a cool study. They looked at this effective orphaning from 3 different perspectives. So, probably one that's most of interest is survival. But then they also looked at how the home range, or basically where these deer are occupying, what habitat they're occupying, how that changed. But then also a really cool part was their interactions with other deer. So survival, they just looked at the number of fawns that died during their first winter. Home range, they determined a central point based on approximate coordinates for each observation. So you see a deer, you say, okay, I think this is my location. And then you do that throughout the entire period before orphaning. And then you have all these points on a map, and then you kind of just draw crosshairs that divides it out. And so then the center of that crosshairs is kind of the center point for that individual. And then they did that before and after orphaning. Now, they only removed does from 21 fawns. Like I said, there were 54 or 52 fawns that were left over after that early mortality point. So for those remaining fawns that didn't have orphaning, they just looked at the middle point of the orphaning for the other fawns, and they used that as the kind of that transition point. So that was mid-October. So you have 2 different groups. You have fawns that have the orphaning, and then you have this control group where there's fawns that still have their parents. And then they compared those two groups. And they also compared before and after orphaning. And then that last bit that they looked at was the interactions that these deer had with other people, with other deer, and looked for changes in the frequency of those interactions. Like how common is it for the deer to interact with another deer, whether it be
be alone.
Or be alone. Yeah. So is any other deer, whether it was sibling, parent, whatever. Yeah.
Good job, man. That was a good explanation. Nice summary. So results. Let's get into those. I thought it was kind of interesting that there was, like, after the orphaning, they didn't really see these orphans alone anywhere, any more than you would see, in the control group, which I thought was like before they orphaned versus after they orphaned, it was like 12 and 14%, and then in the control group it was like 14 and 13%. So like no difference at all.
Right. Yeah.
Which and I feel like they really didn't they would kind of like explain the results, but then they wouldn't really like get into details of like what how they interpreted that. So you kind of have to do your own interpretation.
Yeah.
But the way I interpret that is that the orphaned fawns are like finding a new mother like pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Or
at least someone else to be with. Because like I think that was an important point, is like, because you could have, one of the things that they were looking at was also like the effect of siblings. So you could have siblings that become orphaned and they're still with each other, so they're not alone, right? Because they were just looking at whether you're alone or you're not alone. So I think
and that siblings thing, or especially the twinsies, I thought it was really interesting, and I might be jumping the gun explaining this part, but I thought it was really interesting that when they had siblings, they would not interact with other deer as much and would kind of stay on their own and basically not find that motherly figure to like show them the ropes on where to find food, shelter, and avoid predators and all that stuff.
Yeah, that was actually something I found really interesting too, because I looked into some other studies and they found similar results like that. Like, when you have these siblings, like it's almost like a downfall. Like those individuals are, they're going to stick together and they're not going to go off and learn from other deer. And so I think, I don't remember if it was this paper or another one, but it was saying how, if you are in a situation where you want to be more conservative with the deer that you're harvesting, if you have a doe with multiple fawns, then that might actually be worse than shooting a doe with a single fawn.
Yeah.
Just in the sense of what's going to happen with those orphans.
And in your mind, you might feel like it's better because you're like, oh, well, they've got each other. It's like, well, actually, they're going to probably kill each other, not intentionally, but just by not finding another motherly figure. I also thought it was really cool that they looked at the average shift in home range, and there was no significant difference between when an orphan was by itself or an orphan was with siblings, or it wasn't orphaned at all. There was no significant difference there. But then when they looked at the same thing between doe fawns and buck fawns, there was a huge difference. So the bucks wouldn't move. They were just like, whatever, I'll just stay here. It's cool. And then the does would, travel, a good distance, almost twice the distance that they normally would.
The fawns would.
The doe fawns, yeah.
I have a question about that. Like, is there any reason why buck fawns would be expected to move less? Do you guys know anything about that? I don't see why there'd be any evolutionary adaptation when you're a fawn versus male versus female. But I guess the way that I thought about it,
I guess the way I thought about it is like, and I don't know this for a fact, but it seems like bucks are more likely to disperse, and they did kind of talk about that as well. Like bucks will kind of go look for their own turf,
like earlier on, right?
Maybe when that doe gets taken out, and they're like, well, I guess this spot's mine now, like I don't have to go look for another spot. I'll just stay here. But I don't know if that's it. But they also talked about the dispersal of bucks And that like
less.
if there was twins, I thought this was cool. If there was twins and it was a buck twin, so 2 button bucks, that they would disperse and like walk the longest distances and go like the furthest away from where their mother was killed. Whereas if it was a doe twin or a buck doe twin, then they would stay put. And so it just goes to show that like if there's twins, the does are like, no, we don't need to go anywhere. We'll stay here. But then when they're by themselves, the does are the ones that are making moves, and the bucks are staying put. So it's almost like the does are the ones that really want to be with other deer, and the bucks maybe don't care as much.
So building on that real quick, they looked at I think all of what we've been talking about, or mostly what we've been talking about, has been with fawns. Although that last bit that you're saying with the pair or the sibling bucks, that was with the yearling bucks. And then when they looked at yearling bucks, or at least yearling deer overall, it was only bucks that dispersed to new areas. So the does, the yearling does, they stayed in place. And there were 2 control bucks and 5 orphan bucks that dispersed to new areas. So it's such small numbers of deer. It's hard to say if orphaning has an effect on whether or not the bucks are likely to disperse. Yeah. But for the most part, the deer stay in place. But yeah, so it's if you orphan a buck, it might move to a different area.
That kind of makes me wonder. So I don't know how much you guys know about salmon, but there's this really fun phenomenon with salmon that some of them are genetically predisposed to stray. And by stray, meaning not go back to their natal stream, and basically like go wandering until they find those chemical cues from another stream and then go and spawn there. And that genetic predisposition is basically to encourage genetic variation, like genetic drift. And so it kind of makes me wonder. I'm like, I wonder if some bucks are just genetically predisposed to like just take a walk and not come back,
Yeah, I could see that.
Because it seemed like there's just a small number of those buck fawns that were like, peace, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And then they hit bats, and they're like, crap.
I did Google a little bit on this. Bucks generally leave their mother earlier than does. I was finding online about a year for a buck and up to 2 for a doe. Do you guys?
I mean, I believe
agree
it
with that, or
I feel like you often see groups of does, and you can kind of tell there's like multiple age classes in there. Mm-hmm. And this paper definitely like suggested that was the case. Like they were talking about like the family. I think they use the term family, but basically like if you shoot the doe, like they might stay with they kept saying siblings, not necessarily twins. So it could be like an older sibling, like an older doe that was still, the daughter of the mama doe. And that if they also mentioned that if the oldest doe is killed, that those other younger does would take their place as like the lead doe. So yeah, I think that they often hang out with like, like if you see a group of does, I think there's a really good chance that that's literally a family. Like they're all related to each other and they just stay together for longer periods of time.
Yeah, that's because that actually kind of goes into like one of the interactions that they saw, like so how the deer were interacting with each other, where typically, yearlings tend to spend most of their time with other deer, regardless of whether they were orphaned or not orphaned. But if it was an orphaned yearling, then it's significantly more likely that the yearlings were not seen with adults. So they might be seen with other deer, but not going to be seen with adults. So probably like you were saying, those that sibling yearling or like their and yes, sister. That was their sister. Yeah, exactly. So it's families seem to stick together.
And that kind of brings up an interesting question because the adult the older doe has all the tricks and tips that they can pass down to the young ones.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an older young one, like a yearling or, a couple year old doe in that group, and you shoot the oldest one, like, are those, did that middle-aged class deer learn enough from mama to then teach the fawns? Mm-hmm. And I would venture to guess that, yeah, that's probably the case, because if bucks are leaving at about a year old, you would assume that at about a year old, they've kind of learned everything that they need to learn, Then again, I feel like,
depending on where you are,
I feel like I often see like young bucks, and you can tell it's just like, it's a yearling, year and a half old buck, and they're so stupid. They've never encountered a human. So they'll like walk by and they'll smell you and be like, what the hell is that? And they look at you and they're like, what is that thing? And then, if you're hungry, you shoot it. And I wonder if they had stayed with mama a little bit longer, they would have learned a little faster to like blow and run as fast as they could.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think this paper also, it mentioned that at the end was like, this is for this population of white-tailed deer. This is a population that stays in this enclosure. They've got a pretty simple life. One thing, unfortunately, the paper didn't really talk about is like, what are predators like in this area? Is there something that these deer need to avoid? But also, it was talking about how in other populations, you could have these huge migrations that deer do. Here in Colorado with mule deer, they got migrations up and down the mountains. So if you're an orphaned deer and you don't know it's time to get down, is that something that might have an effect? Yeah.
And they did talk about that the mule deer migration is believed to be a learned behavior. And so if you're in a place like Canada where the whitetails will actually do short distance migrations, it might be a very different situation. Mm-hmm. But on the topic of predation, and that's something I thought about too, I was like, this is a high fence area. Like there's no predators in there. So when they were like, yeah, there was no difference in survival rates, no significant difference between the orphaned and not orphaned ones. I was like, yeah, because they're probably just, maybe they're not eating the best quality food, but they're still just eating and they'll figure it out eventually. Mm-hmm. But when you factor predators into that, then it's like, now you don't have mama to help you avoid those. And fawns are, that's when most predators are able to take out deer. Once they get older, like, coyotes and stuff like that are not really doing anything to a deer. Mm-hmm. And there was another paper that you had sent us. I think it was the Giuliano 1999 paper. Mm-hmm. And they had, they saw, and they used GPS collars. This was 20 years later. So they had a little more technology. They saw that from the orphaned fawns, they literally like redid this same study, but with GPS collars. Mm-hmm. Like they looked at all the same things and they found that 20% of the orphaned fawns died. And I wondered, because that was on a ranch, a low fence area where there's probably going to be coyotes and all kinds of other predators. I wonder if that 20% is, can be attributed to predation, and that's the big difference between the two studies.
Mm-hmm. So the one thing that, if I'm remembering correctly, you're right, there was a lot more predation there, but I think they also tagged fewer deer. So like 20% of, I can't remember the exact number, but 20% of 8 deer is 2 deer. So
I think it was 14 deer. It was like, It was not a lot.
Yeah, so that's also one of the things that's tough with this is, a lot of these studies, they're not looking at a lot of deer. But this one from the 1980s that we're talking about, they did have a lot of deer, which is one of the things that, there's some limitations to this paper, but that was one thing that I thought was nice about it. But also just building off of what you were saying there about the predators, I think this also comes back to what this paper touched on earlier, is that when a fawn gets orphaned, it doesn't stay alone. So if you're, in a single child and you get orphaned, you're probably going to go find an adult. And so I think even if you have predators in the system, I think some of these deer as orphans, they're going to be all right. But it comes back again to what we're talking about when you have siblings, where now you have 2 naive deer that aren't going to be as, aren't as well known, or they don't know the predators as well. And I think that's where you might have higher mortality
Yeah.
from predation, is when you have siblings that get orphaned.
Yeah, and I guess there's probably a window of time after the orphaning where they're still looking for another group of deer to join. You know, they might be alone for a few days, and I think that's kind of the window where a predator could really take advantage of it.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to like know from that Giuliano paper, like when the mortality happened after orphaning. Like, was it pretty quickly, or was it later down the road?
Right.
But again, these old papers, they don't get into those details. Like, I could never publish either of these papers. Like, they would just throw it in the trash and be like, no, you don't have enough details in here. I feel like scientists back in the day really had it made.
I don't know, though. I mean, the way that they were tracking these deer in this study, you know, they had to put deer tags on them and they just drive around for hours. And
it sounds kind of, I mean, yeah, it sounds like something that I've done with a rifle in my hand when when it's like way too hot in the middle of the day and I'm like, I'm not getting in a tree stand. Let's just drive around. And then there was that other paper as well, which I thought was interesting. They found some other things. They found that the orphaned deer were skinnier, like they had a lower overall
females,
weight.
right?
What?
As females, right?
Yeah. The females had a lower weight. But then they also found that 50% of them were getting bred, of the orphans were getting bred. And keep in mind, they only had like 10 deer tagged or something like that.
Right.
But 50% of the orphans were getting bred in that first year. And so they were saying that maybe the reason they were skinnier is because they had to allocate energy towards milk production in that first year instead of continuing to grow.
And so I don't have this note in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it was only the orphan deers that were bred, right? Or am I wrong on that one? Yeah. So I think you know that's something that could also have lasting effects. You know, if you have, so now you have a doe that's going to be a smaller doe, but also fawns that are producing offspring in those populations. You know, those fawns are now going to be smaller than if you had like a yearling or older doe that was breeding. So if you have a fawn that's a doe that's breeding and it's producing a buck, that's going to be a smaller buck. So
is it though?
From what I've heard, it's because it's.
I mean, I don't know though, because the thing is that fawn isn't smaller because of genetics. It's smaller because it just got bred earlier in life. So like it might just be that the buck might get born smaller. It might just take a little bit longer.
That's a good point. Yeah,
full potential. You know, but yeah, definitely in its early stages of life, like it's going to be disadvantaged because it's smaller and it might just take longer to get big.
You know, I think this could be a good topic for, I don't have any paper on it, but I could look to see if there is one, and maybe we could put this in the post for next week. Does the age of a doe influence the size of the
quality of the buck that comes out of it?
Yeah,
that's an interesting question. You could throw it in there without having a paper and just be like, "This is my pitch."
Yeah.
In fact, I think you just did.
Yeah.
But anyway, so let's get into the meat and potato. Well, we already got into the meat and potatoes, but let's get into dessert here. Like, how is this going to affect your decisions as a hunter in the woods? Like, how would you change the way that you do things, or would you just keep doing things the same way?
I guess I'll take the lead on that. And I'm going to say for me, it depends on where I'm hunting. So this study and a lot of these studies, so there's other ones that we mentioned, they were in Texas in areas where there's high deer populations. And, if I'm hunting in an area where deer populations are not high, I might be a little hesitant to pull the trigger because, the fawn probably will still find a doe, but it might take it a little bit more time. If I'm in an area where there's deer all over the place, then, that fawn's going to find something quick. And if that doe is giving me a good shot that I know can be a quick, lethal shot, and, it's something that's, it's a shot I've practiced 100 times, 1,000 times, then I'm going to take a shot that I know is going to be a good shot. But if I'm in an area, so I think that's for me what it's going to come down to is, if there's a lot of deer, I'll take the shot. Not so much deer, I'll let it walk.
So you kind of just like made me think of something. If you shoot a doe with a baby, like with a fawn with it,
Mm-hmm.
did you just teach that fawn a valuable lesson? And
Uh,
then when it has a baby and it's a buck, is she going to teach that buck to avoid hunters better, allowing that buck to turn into a giant because it's now just that much more weary?
Yeah.
You
I can see
know?
yeah,
that.
what's the long-term fitness of all this? Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
I pretty much just like gave everybody the green light to shoot every doe that has a fawn because in the end it's going to make bigger bucks.
Bigger, smarter bucks.
Yeah. So this was my take on it. If a doe comes out with a single fawn, go ahead and shoot her. Doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. The chances that it's going to decrease survival pretty low. I mean, yeah, it's possible that it won't survive, but it's not that high. But that said, if I've already got a good amount of meat in the freezer, if I'm here in Florida, I'll probably let them walk because I can do that kind of stuff if I go up north where there's like tons of deer. If it's a solo button buck, then I got to ask myself the question of how badly do I need this meat right now? Because I want that buck to grow up. And if there's twins, I've never had a chance to shoot a mama with twin fawns, but if the opportunity presented itself, I 100% would let it walk. That's what I've taken home from this.
Yeah.
I agree with you guys. You got to take in regional effect. Both of you brought up. I'm still not sold on the lack of predation effect, especially where we're at. I don't see. Yeah, I don't think I'm there yet.
Well, and deer are not as densely populated around here, so it might take them a little bit longer to find an older doe to tag along to. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a window there where I think they're very susceptible to predation.
They're gonna get eaten by the panthers.
But hey, what if you see a group of does and there's like multiple. There's multiple deer that are not fawns. I'm shooting the oldest one.
So that's where I've been too. If I see, if there's more than one doe in that group, then I'm going to take a shot at one of the does. Yeah, whichever one gives me the cleaner shot.
Because no matter what, like that fawn's going to be able to find another doe because there's one right there.
Right there. Yeah.
So, but that said, Cody, I just want to put this out there, and I don't mean to put you on blast, but being the least experienced hunter in the room right now, take the shot, dude. Like, you got to get the experience. Like, if I could give anybody advice as a beginning hunter, it's get as many kills under your belt as you can, because it's going to make you that much more efficient and effective when it really counts, when there's a giant buck in front of you. So, like, but if you're an experienced hunter and you've got, meat in the freezer and you're not so worried about getting meat that year, then you can really start to think about this. But for you, man, just take the shot. If you get a legal one in front of you, just take it. I know somebody's probably gonna be mad that I said that, but at the end of the day, the name of the game is putting meat in the freezer. So, and to do that, something has to die. It's just part of it.
Yeah.
All right.
Got me thinking about these things a little more intimately, for sure. This paper, I liked it. It was a little wild at times through, but yeah, overall I liked it.
All right, I think we've come to the part where we pitch next week's topics. Who wants to kick it off?
Well, I'll just repeat the one that I said earlier as a potential topic. So that was looking at how doe age might affect the quality of bucks that they produce. Like I said, I don't have a paper currently on that. So if I don't find that, another one that I found is looking at the effect of like soil quality and food quality on deer size. And that's looking at just like, the weight of the deer, but also looking at from buck perspective, what's the quality of their antlers. So another way of looking at what the
you're going with 2 topics.
Well, I can't guarantee the first one.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
the
So
thing.
we'll put them both in there. I think that's fine.
They both have to do with, how good a deer you're getting, how good of a buck are you getting.
Well, yeah. How the quality of a buck is affected by certain factors.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
All right, Cody, what are you going with?
I'm going to go with the same one as last week. The
It was a popular one. It was a
fine
popular
scale
one.
vegetation, habitat use by whitetail during hunting season. So a little more recent paper using GPS collars, looking at specifically what types of habitats these deer are using in pressured areas.
And I went ahead and picked out something completely new. So I've always been really kind of a believer that the solunar charts that are provided by a lot of the different apps out there, that there's something to it. It's not 100%, but it seems like deer activity lines up with those. And so I found a paper that digs into that exact question: is there something to it, or is it just false hope that we're giving ourselves, which honestly is still better than no hope. But so I found a paper that dives into that, and they have the answer. So if you pick this topic, we will give you the answers.
That's a good sales pitch.
Yeah. Hey, I told you guys we're selling our ideas, and maybe at some point we'll we'll track how many each of us have won. But you're disqualified you're disqualified from any rounds in which you put 2.
That's fair. That's fair. I'll take that.
Half point.
All right. I think that's a wrap for today. So thank you all for tuning in. And again, make sure that you're subscribed or that you've hit that follow button on whatever platform you're using. And maybe send this over to a friend. It takes 5 seconds to just put it in a text message and send it to a couple of your buddies. So, yeah, we appreciate y'all. And we look forward to seeing what you guys vote for. We'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
And happy rut.
Listening.